Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. But today's intro is not about EVE Online because I received a mail about Project Nova. I think it's a mail that has been sent to anyone that signed up for the information letters from Project Nova, and I sort of like what I'm seeing there, although it's still very high level and very low on specifics. Some of the aspects that were already explained in that mail to me seem pretty exciting. First of all, what I really like is the fact that it looks like it's gonna be a grim dark game, just like EVE Online, with the harshness that we all know and love from EVE Online. So I like that they took that route. I think that it's really something that'll help Project Nova stand out from most other shooters right now. The setting sounds super promising to me. Apparently we'll be fighting on the outside of structures and ships. That sounds really crazy, but to me it looks like there's one big lesson that they have learned from Valkyrie, which is that everyone was just gushing about the environment, the atmosphere that the EVE ships and the EVE battles on the background brought to that game. And to me personally, once I started to play some more Valkyrie, I completely phased that out because I had to be so focused on the very fast-paced action that was happening around me, rather than the larger scope, the larger battle, and the awesome graphics around me. And I think in a shooter that you'll have a bit more time to enjoy like an EVE Online battle happening above your head as you're assaulting strategic points on a structure, for instance. So that to me sounded very promising as well. And well, they are basically gearing up towards what they're calling sort of a co-development, where people from the community will hopefully get their hands on the game and be able to start giving them advice and feedback on everything that they've done so far. So Project Nova put itself on the radar for me, and if you have any interest in the game yourself, you can always go to ccpgames.com/projectnova, sign up there, and you'll get the same information that I just talked about, and hopefully more information soon, because I think it would be great. A shooter in the EVE Online universe on PC, finally. I think since Dust 514, a lot of people have been hoping that it would finally happen, and it looks like it's happening right now. Of course, we are also playing EVE Online, and we are here for the market in EVE Online, so let's get started on that as well. Plex and stuff, that's going to be at 3 minutes. Like that. And let's start here. Plex, after reaching a bottom of, well, even less than 2.8 million, is rebounding a little bit. So CCP sales, summer slump, all of that to me has created a very nice bottom, which last week I told you guys, if you feel like making the investment in Plex, that would have probably been the right time to do so. You could have bottom for 2.8 to 2.9 million. Now in Jita itself, sellers are coming in. Well, there's one selling now for just below 2.9 million, but the next one is coming very close to 3 million already. Buyers are at 2.8. If we go to the player-owned trade hubs, they're still hanging at around 2.9 million, which is still a pretty good price. Anything under 3 million, I think, with the right horizon, will make you a decent amount of ISK. But if you look at the price history here, pretty obvious that a bottom has been formed around a week ago, and unless CCP comes out with some more massive sales, all of a sudden I do think that we are going to start to see some hesitation, maybe even a bit of an increase in price throughout the summer. But then once some winter announcements come out, some more interesting stuff comes out, and people get back from their summer holidays, I do think that an investment here will turn out to be the right choice. Next up, we have the multiple pilot training certificate. Let's take a look at that one. Volumes are still up a little bit, and we are back above 1 billion ISK in general. 1 billion, 20 million for the sellers and 950 million for the buyers. Here it's the April bottom that apparently was the right time to try to grab a couple of those when prices went below 900 million ISK, which was of course very cheap. But at this point, the upwards pressure is keeping multiple pilot training certificate from doing a double bottom or anything like that. It's pretty obvious that we stopped shy from the 900 million, and that the market said once we went below $1 billion ISK that taking those pilot training certificates as investments was the right move to do, and I fully agree with that. You can clearly see the potential on the rest of the chart, which again after the summer, look at the highs here, November, December, 1.5 billion is possible. Nice 50% profit on your 1 billion investment. So there is still time, I think. If you can grab them on a buy order, try 960, try 975, something like that. I do think you can still grab some multiple pilot training certificates below $1 billion ISK, but if CCP doesn't come out with more sales, I do think that for both the training certificates and Plex, the best times have been like in April or right now on this bottom right here. Next up, we'll take a look at the skill extractors, which I think are corroborating that story. These are of course very strongly tied to Plex, but if Plex go up, or if Plex fail to go up, then these skill extractors would fail to go up as well. But you can see the volatility here as well. We went below 330 million, selling now for 325, buyers at 320, but the bottom here, the bottom price went to 320 million, so we are up those 5 million again, and you can clearly see that the market has bottomed out here and that we are starting to come back to a more average price. And if you take an average for the full year, you can expect 350 million at a minimum for these skill extractors. We can make the same exercise for Plex. Yeah, 3.1 million should definitely be possible as an average for most of the year, except for this low period here. So that, in my opinion, is again a strong indication that right now and on these dips is the right time to make these investments. And so the skill extractors here, if the chart is any indication, this is a pretty volatile upswing that'll probably have some momentum. Next up, we have the large scale injectors, and this to me is super interesting, completely unexpected, but look at that, 800 million ISK, and then the dive down under pressure from the lower Plex prices, which have been going on for several months, but now it's basically become unstoppable for some reason, and this is really interesting. 765 million for the sellers, 738 for the first buyer. After that it goes 732 and then even to 713. So this is quite unexpected. Can't really tell you what exactly is behind this massive dip in the large scale injectors. Perhaps there has been a sort of a sale in a certain item that has managed to trigger that. But yes, again, look at this entire chart. We are now hovering at, what would you easily be able to grab them at? 750, something like that, I think is definitely doable. And if you look at this entire chart, we're definitely below 10 months of the last year, average 800 million ISK. Now you're buying them for 750. It's not that great of a potential, but keep in mind inflation is a reality in the game as well. And with the right horizon, this looks like a great opportunity to grab some large scale injectors, especially if you plan to potentially use them in the future. It's obviously a great time to do so, but even as an investment, I think this is quite nice. Very, very unexpected in my personal book here. Next up, we have the small scale injectors doing the same thing, dropping from 160 million, currently selling for 153, buyers are at 148, so you could probably pick those up at 150 without too much trouble. Very nice drop off, and obviously again also putting us back at the price range of about a year ago, and now we've had a whole year where the prices have been above that by quite a decent margin. And then finally we also have the daily alpha skill injectors. This might actually be the reason. I'm not exactly sure. It's a theory looking at what's happening here on the daily alpha injectors, which are bought straight from the store. These must have been on sale. And if this is the reason why now the skill injectors have also dropped off quite sharply, then to me this does indicate that a very large portion of the demand for skill points still comes from alpha clones. If the impact of a sale by CCP is not to only drop off the daily alpha injectors, but then also to drop off the large scale injectors, then they have a big influence on the market. And we have to keep that in mind, that the sales that CCP does in the alpha injectors, which normally shouldn't touch the market too much if the alpha clone demand for skill points is limited, then it shouldn't show a big impact on the other products. But here, I mean, the timing is off a little bit, but it might be what's happening. So very interesting in my book to also see these daily alpha injectors to a pretty low point. The chart is not great just yet, but selling for 51.4 million, 48 million for the buyers. Normal price, you could say 55 to 60 million should definitely be possible here as well, especially if they CCP could somehow, you know, reinvigorate, put alpha clones on to the forefront again, bring in some new blood. Then you could potentially have a really good price for these daily alpha injectors as well, which are currently grabbing for around 50 million ISK. Very interesting, very tricky market, of course, all tied to plex real life money, but just look at the low points at this point, and to me there are a lot of investment opportunities in this market. Next up, we'll move on to some minerals. That's going to be at 11.10. Like that. As always, we'll start with titanium, and if you took a look at the ticker, you can see that we are under pressure, which, well, mining is something that tends to actually stay pretty stable even throughout the summer. Lots of multi-boxers, and especially in the current situation where we have the, you could say, overpowered Torcal in a sense. Basically, there is too much supply in the game for the current destruction. Add to that lower activity, well, you could actually say this is very likely to exacerbate the problem that, you know, supply and destruction would go down more, doesn't need to go down that much in general numbers, and you need a lot more mining to drop off in order to make up for that, and that's just probably not happening. So I would be careful when it comes to this summer. I do expect that we'll see a lot of pressure unless some sort of big war happens for some reason. But titanium, you can clearly see we were trying to hold on to 5.5, and then as summer approached, we had to give ground for 5.3, 5.0, and we are still dropping off. So sellers in JITA are going for 5.01 ISK at this point. Buyers are at 481, and still here the 2 billion coming in at 507, half a billion here. These two together are also half a billion. It is slowing down in the volumes, which I would say is good news. Once we get below 5 ISK, there is still some hesitation, some resistance to the market, but the average prices are obviously below 5 ISK at this point, which means that there is also people selling straight to these buyers, which is not good news. And as I've said, oversupply situation is what's happening at the moment, and even the better minerals are struggling at this point to stay around an average price. Let's take a look at pyrite then. That is still staying below 4 ISK on average, 394 for the sellers, 380 for the buyers. 2 billion of those coming in here as well, another 700 million here as well. That is just too much supply for the market, 1 year low with nowhere to go. Next to that, we've got Mexilon, which has been really the strongest mineral throughout the changes that have been coming in the game, because it's a bottleneck in nullsec production. But here you can also see 80 ISK not that long ago, have to give back that ground. We're now at 70 ISK, which is the 5 ISK for titanium in my opinion. Still a strong price, but look at that, 238 million here, another 65, another 78 million. There is just more supply competing for the prices, driving the prices closer and closer to 70 ISK. If at some point big enough supply triggers below 70, we could really see a big leg down for Mexilon. 70 for the sellers, 67.5 for the buyers, under pressure as well at the moment. Isogen is not going to be pretty. Obviously, this 1 year chart is just terrible, starting at 50 ISK, and now we're almost at 25 ISK at this point, selling for 27. Buyers are also at 27. So we are bottoming out here, you would think, yet 140 million, 166 million, that supply is just crazy. It's too much for the market right now. That is pretty obvious. Well, that's all relative, of course. There is still a price range, but considering this entire 1 year chart, compared to the whole year, we are definitely making too much minerals for the game right now. If you're that's all relative, of course. What I'm trying to say here is that if what you're looking for is a more stable situation with Isogen, for instance, at around 50 ISK, then yeah, we are in a bad spot compared to that. But if you want to keep Tech 1 chip super cheap, then this is of course exactly what you want to see. Next up, we've got Noxium. That's even worse. In the last month or so, we dropped off from the previous barrier that was defended quite heavily, 300 ISK. We just broke through that, and we're now playing with 275. 277 is for the sellers and 257 for the buyers. Noxium again at a 1 year low point. Then we have the Nullsic minerals, which is of course very bad as well from that perspective of, well, used to cost 1000, 1100 ISK, or you used to get 1000 or 1100 ISK for Zydrine. Moon mining changes, well, look at that, increased supply coming from HiSec, coming from wormhole space, and it is something that is now so ubiquitous. You can mine any of these minerals pretty much, I think, except for Morphite, anywhere, that yeah, supply has just become too strong for the market to absorb. There's not enough destruction of these goods at this point. 1 year low point as well. First sellers coming in at less than 600 ISK for Zydrine and 552 for the buyers. Obviously quite a depressing situation if you're looking to make a lot of ISK on your Zydrine. Next up, you get Megasite. Same story, of course. Currently selling for 614, buyers at 608. So Megasite is trying to hold on to 600 ISK. Will it succeed? Well, Zydrine tried the same thing, but we just broke through that. And then look at the sellers coming in all of a sudden as well. 2 million, 2 million, 4.6 million, but it's so many of them in the last 24 hours that I do think Zydrine is set for another leg down. And that puts, in my opinion, a very strong perspective of be very careful if you're looking to invest in minerals at this point, because we really thought that Zydrine was going to defend 600 for quite a while, but you can see that once it's broken, once the first person comes in with a couple million and is saying, okay, I'm just dumping these for less than 600 ISK, everyone else is following suit, and we are driving the price down very quickly to basically a new balance, right? We managed to hold on 600 to 700 for quite a while here. Now that we've broken that, you can fully expect us to start moving in the 500 to 600 band for the upcoming months. So Megasite is trying to hold on as well, broke through 625 and is still trying to defend 600. But I personally, if we look at what just happened to Zydrine, I'm not sure that it's also going to be able to hold on to that. And then finally, we also have Morphite. Let's take a look at that. Breaking through the 9000 ISK barrier on the downside, selling now for 8700, buyers coming in at 8200. It's already starting to come 8200, that's right here on the chart. It's definitely coming into an interesting investment opportunity price range as well, in my opinion. Especially if we drop off a little bit more. Well, 8200 is still a decent amount of demand, so if you want to make that Morphite investment, you can definitely do so now with a buy order just above 8200. If you have plenty of patience and if you expect the situation throughout the summer to remain the same, then of course you can wait for these to drop off and try to buy closer to 8000 or even below 8000, although that is going to demand quite a bit of supply, which does exist. Again, look at the last 24 hours. It's more than a full front page of Morphite that has come in the last 24 hours. So the potential downtrends for minerals, unfortunately, are still very real. Next up, we have PI at 19 minutes. Like that. We'll start with some broadcast notes, which after bouncing back a little bit from what I would call an investment opportunity, right? If you have an average price on a day of 2 million and then you see this volume increase, in my opinion, it's pretty obvious that some people have been investing. That triggered an increase in price to 2.5 million, making the average of 225, basically reached. But supply is coming back in. New structures are not on the horizon, so any fresh supply is going to put some more pressure on the price. Currently selling for 2.1 million, buyers are at 2 million. A bit of a lack of demand, you can clearly see that here So again, now on the buyer side of things, I think broadcast nodes are in a good place to try and grab a couple of cheap ones for when CCP does announce a new structure to be released or to be planned for the game. Construction blocks next, after doing really well in April, up to 15,000 ISK and holding well above average as well in the last month or so, is now back towards 12,000 ISK on the chart. 12,300 for the sellers, 11,000 for the buyers. And look at that again, the lack of buyers here is starting to show up. That's summer activity, and this does create opportunities. 11,000 ISK, that's right here on the chart. You could also start buying up some construction blocks on the buyer side of things. Sellers are still on average though, so it's not, I think, a big mistake to sell your construction blocks either. Next up, we have our consumer electronics also breaking the mold on the downside here. 14,000 ISK. Look at that, going down towards 12,000 ISK at this point. 13,000 for the sellers, 12,100 for the first buyer. Obviously some more pressure here as well. Does this create an opportunity? Well, if we can disregard these 2 months in November and December, then the average is 14,000 ISK for consumer electronics. So this does look like a pretty sharp drop off with potentially an investment opportunity again. Coolants, fuel related, holding on just below 10,000 ISK. I'd say that that's good news for fuel consumption, fuel production, things like that. 10,000 for the sellers, 9,600 for the buyers. A little bit of a comeback for coolants over the last 6 months or so. A very slow comeback, but definitely, in my opinion, a very welcome one. And that's because I'm producing coolants, of course, on a couple of gas planets. Enriched uranium holding at 11,000 ISK, very stable at the current price range. Very weird chart early on, very atypical for most of the other PI products. They're not showing this pattern, so you know, large potential. 16,000 ISK for a long time, several months going down to a nice buy opportunity, but then not going back up or anything like that, just straight up flat at 11,000 ISK. 11,500 for the sellers, 10,900 for the buyers. We can again see a bit less demand, but oh, and if we would go like that, you would see that that is one note to make. There is extra demand that does show up for PI in the trade hubs around JITA. So don't see this as, okay, that's really all the buyers there are. There are definitely more of them around here, but that does take transportation. Some people are a bit lazy, and so these buy orders do have an opportunity. They're just not that easy to materialize. Next up, the integrity response drones. Let's take a look at that chart. After reaching 2.5 million, going back up as well a little bit. Interesting. 2.7 for the sellers, 2.5 for the buyers. So yeah, not one that I would invest in right now. Obviously, broadcast nodes look a little better. Mechanical parts, fuel related, staying above 10,000 ISK. I'm definitely happy with that comeback in the last few months again. 10,700 for the sellers, 10,000 for the buyers, but the lack of demand here again in JITA 4.4 is pretty obvious. If you go a jump out, you do see that there is more demand, but not around the 10,000 mark. That is obviously, once these 3 powers would drop off, then price for mechanical parts would drop off quite sharply as well. Next up, we have our nuclear reactors continuing on their descent here. So that is, to me, very, very interesting now. 88,000 for the sellers, 79,000 for the buyers. I'd say this is an investment opportunity because they are very cheap on the chart, well below average. Robotics holding strong above 100,000 ISK, so that's not bad. 104 for the sellers, 97,000 for the buyers, very narrow margin. Probably reaching a high point. Basically, any fresh supply is going to start to put pressure on that price, but seeing this comeback from a fuel related material, again seeing it back on an average that we've known before. If you take a look, for instance, at coolants, 8,000 to 9,000 ISK was really obviously a bottom price that never lasted very long. Here it lasted for a very long time, and 10,000 ISK was, well, it's a little bit low for its average, but it's not an unseen price for coolant. So that's definitely something that has recovered. Robotics recovered quite a bit more quickly than coolants and mechanical parts. But yeah, demand in fuels has apparently picked up as the refineries have been dotted throughout HISEC in wormhole space for all of the Tech 2 raw materials. And as a result, these PI materials do make a bit of a comeback, and you would have made a pretty decent investment buying at the bottom. It felt very risky, but it turns out that fuel consumption was not completely gone. Basically just needed some time to recover as bosses were removed and the refineries came to the game. Self-harmonizing power cores flat below 2.2 million, so yeah, less than that for the sellers. Look at the lack of buyers, get rid of this one, and then here in GTA 4.4 you can try to grab harmonizing power cores for less than 2 million. Of course, again, keep in mind there is a bit of resistance for a bit of extra demand here in the trade hubs around GTA. Next up we have the superconductors, 11,000 ISK. It's not a completely crazy price, it's at the lower end, but 11,600 for the sellers and 10,700 for the buyers. I would personally start to hold on to that, or if you do really want to sell your superconductors right now, definitely wait for a sell order. Don't sell straight to these buyers. Test cultures next. Let's take a look at that. After dropping off last week to 8,750 is actually holding strong, not reaching the bottom of less than 8,000 ISK, so 9,300 for the sellers, 8,600 for the buyers. Still doing okay for these test cultures. Back on the average price, I would say, for the entire chart. Of course, any more supply could put some serious pressure on this. With bare mainframes, bit of a buy opportunity like 10 days ago or so when we were below 2.2 million. Now we are at 2.5 for the sellers and 2.3 for the buyers. So PI is in an interesting spot. If you see something that drops off with some serious momentum like construction blocks here, I think we are looking at potentially some buy opportunities, and especially in the advanced PI materials, I do like it when we go below average here to potentially make some investments for the next set of structures. Let's move on to the Tech 1 chips then at 2645. Obviously, with the minerals under such pressure and it just not stopping, now it's Sidewind that basically broke through another barrier, going for less than 600 ISK. This probably won't be a pretty picture. Here is, for instance, the Apocalypse that in the last couple of months had to drop off from 150 to 130 million. It's 140 for the sellers, 126 for the buyers, and it's also a tiny market at this point, selling well below average. For the Apocalypse, very cheap right now. The Caracal has been very interesting as it dropped below 9 million ISK, and look at that, it's just not stopping. Another leg down to 8 million ISK at this point, 8.6 million for the sellers, 7.8 for the buyers. And once again, you can see the lack of demand, the low volumes, and the very cheap minerals that are now basically breaking the back of some of these Tech 1 ships here. The Caracal, normally you can get 10 million for that at least, and now it's selling for 8 million ISK. Potential investment, perhaps, if you can buy some below 8 million. I think we're talking super cheap Caracals at this point. The Catalyst is holding decently well, surprisingly well. This was burn JITA activity where lots of catalysts were hoarded, bought, created, etc. Played hassle with the market a little bit. Obviously we dropped off, but it's still holding all right at 1.1 million for the sellers and just below a million for the buyers. The Drake, that's going to be a different story. Exactly, look at that, 45 million, dropping off now to less than 40 million. Yep, first sellers coming in at 39.4, buyers at 35.5, super cheap again. And this is just the mineral pressure. It's just not doable anymore for the markets. People have had time to normalize to these new mineral prices, to stock up on them, and when you make the calculations, obviously you can make very cheap drakes on the current mineral prices, and that's why we're dropping off. People are willing to sell them for less than 40 million because they can make them so cheaply at this point. If CCP would intervene here, it could be quite interesting, and this could be very lucrative prices, but that does demand a CCP intervention that is somehow going to stimulate either, make it harder to make Tech 1 chips, to get the resources, the minerals and things like that, which I think is not very likely. What could happen is, of course, a certain content that would be very risky and would be Tech 1 specific. That is one path that I could potentially see that could bring back the Tech 1 market at this point. So the Ferox going for 40 million, trying to defend that, 40.5 million for the sellers. But just look at the buyers in JITA. There's 5 buyers of Feroxes in JITA in the trade hubs around you. That's yeah, a couple more. That's definitely not bad. Actually buying them in tens, but buying them for 37 million, well below 40. Super cheap again. And then the volumes here are obviously below 100 and continuously actually under pressure. So not a great time to be a Tech 1 battlecruiser producer. Same with the battleships. Here is the Megatron that did really well to hold on to 150 million for that long, actually an average price for the year. But now we're obviously dropping off seriously because of the minerals. 140 for the sellers, 123 for the buyers in JITA. Next up, we've got the Oracle. That's just like the Caracal breaking through 1 year low point. The Caracal, oh, that's something I forgot to mention, 1 year low point as well. The Drake, no, not yet. It's been worse during the arms race event. But if we disregard that, we're also at a 1 year low point. And then we were talking about the Oracle here. 1 year low point, 60 million, 62 for the sellers, 56 for the buyers. Just not great. Raven next went down to 140, a little bit of a bounce back here, 145 for the sellers, 136 for the buyers, but again well below average. The Retriever, after dropping to a 1 year low point of around 18.5 million, a bit of a comeback. Obviously you can see some increased volumes as well. At some point investors do show up on these 1 year low points. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if the Oracle made a bit of a comeback, because these are super cheap at right now, and then you can have a temporary jump up like here for the Retriever. That's back above 20 million. But look at the reaction to that. Oh, we can sell Retrievers for more than 20 million. I can produce them this cheaply. Well, here's a couple hundred coming in that are actually bring the price back below 20 million. The Tempest next, also pretty close to 1 year low point, actually went close to the bottom that was created with the arms race event. That's not great. 143 now for the sellers, 129 for the buyers. Then we've got the Thrasher also cracking under the pressure a little bit after holding really strong, especially here during Burn JITA and before Burn JITA, you know, in that preparation phase, well above 1 million. Now we're below 1 million, and look at that, we're dropping off even further. 920,000 is for the sellers, 805 for the buyers. The Tornado battlecruiser, yeah, that's not good news, right? Battlecruiser takes a bit more minerals, so the impact of those cheaper minerals can be quite pronounced sometimes. Here's the Tornado, 1 year low point, breaking through 55 million on the chart. 55 million for the sellers, 51 for the buyers, and the JITA buyers again almost non-existent. There's some extra buyers around perimeter, but honestly it's terribly low. The Tristan still below 500,000 ISK. Normally you can get a price of above that, but sellers coming in at 476. They're just, you know, really cheap. The Venture finally cracking a little bit as well here, breaking through 250 on the charts. Was doing really well for some reason, but 255 for the sellers and 200,000 for the buyers. That's a pretty wide margin. Fresh supply can really put more pressure on the price for the Venture. And then we've got the Vexor, 1 year low point, breaking through 9 million, 8.8 for the sellers, 8.1 for the buyers. The Tech 1 market, well, it's a reflection of the mineral market, of course. Super cheap, super affordable as well. So personally, I've already hinted at that. What I would like to see, what I think could be a pretty interesting solution here, is to have a sort of PvP version of Into the Abyss, make that Tech 1 specific so that people feel like they can go up against anyone, because they're also restricted to Tech 1 ships. They don't have to go up against faction ships, don't have to go up against Tech 2 ships with much better resistances, and you'd be much more willing to lose something like a couple of Vexors in there rather than lose your pimped out Gila to an Abyssal site or anything like that. I think it's definitely something that could help bring the Tech 1 market back a little bit. Just not sure if it's on the books, but that would be something that I personally would probably take part in, because that could be very entertaining, very interesting, and you don't risk basically losing your very best chip. It's gonna be very tricky to fly something you can't afford to lose in that scenario, I think. Moving on to Tech2 ships at 34.35. Like that. Let's take a look at that. That's not going to be too good, I think, again, because especially on the smaller ships like interceptors, well, you have the current event that is basically a race. So something like an interceptor that's immune to bubbles is going to be very popular there. It's also super fast. So obviously here is the Ares interceptor, well above average, selling at around 35 million now, actually 33.7 for the first seller and then 30.1 million for the buyers. I'd say this, you could try to sell them. You're making good risk on selling them at this point, but if you're looking for that investment, it's obviously not in the right place. Cerberus still well above average as well, selling just below 300 million apparently, 290 and 268 for the buyers. That again is, in my opinion, not the best place to make the investment. The Claw is slowly dropping off, heading for 30 million on the chart. Where are the buyers? Ooh, that is interesting. The Jita buyers are down to 27 million. Is there demand that's showing up in the player-owned trade hubs? Well, it's just one buyer also at 27 million, so it's not by that much. If you look at this entire chart, 27 million is going to be around here. You could risk it if you want to. Very interesting to see the lack of demand in the Claw here all of a sudden. Prices on average reaching 30 million ISK, and those buy orders look interesting. You could risk it. It's the first one where I would say here maybe it's not a very pronounced buy opportunity. We'd need to see at say 25 million or something like that on this first buyer to make that happen, but at least it's a possibility. The Crow next, holding well above 30 million, so I don't like that. 34 for the sellers, 31.6 for the first buyer. That's a big no to me. You're even too late to sell, and it's definitely too early to buy. We get the Crusader next, same situation, right? Coming from a high point of more than 35 million ISK. If we look at this daily average, dropping off a little bit, but holding so much above 30 million. And look at the potential. We have to get close to 25 to call it a buy opportunity. First buyers though, 26 million. Let's take a look at the trade hubs. That's where the 30 million demand still exists. So unfortunately, it's a bit too late. And really for Tech2, I am going to have to include the buy orders, I think, from the trade hubs. The sell orders, I think, yeah, that doesn't show anything, but the buy orders, yep. So I think we'll add this filter here, because sometimes there is this extra demand, and apparently for Tech2 ships, it is starting to come alive there. Heretic going up to 90 million ISK, so that's a big no again. 87 million for the sellers, 72 million for the buyers, and these are all in Jita, but there is this bit of extra demand. So very interesting here. We're already talking a destroyer. Jita has taken over, but when we're talking about frigates, well, the Ares, nope, Jita has taken over, but some frigates, once demand dries up in Jita 4.4, then the buy orders in the player-owned trade hubs actually gain greatly in value, in importance, and it is something to note that it's in small ships, in something that can still very easily be moved, in my opinion. So, okay, definitely something new that we've learned here, and I think I'll just keep the filter off like that, so that we do see demand in player-owned trade hubs. Just know that it's going to be very specific when demand dries up in Jita, that we will still look at that, and then we can really start to see if a real buy opportunity has formed or not. So Hound dropping off to 13 million as well, not at a low point on the chart just yet. 31.5 for the sellers, 28.5 for the buyers, and here not that much of an impact from the trade hubs just yet. So I would say we could go lower on the buyer side here if we can get rid of all of these buyers. Close to 25 million, that's where I would call a definite buy opportunity. The Ishtar, that's a pretty sharp drop off, heading for 250 million, to 62 for the sellers, to 46 for the buyers. That is actually pretty interesting, bringing it back to an average that is very close to, well, the premium that was paid after the moon mining changes were first introduced. This is a very sharp drop off with a bit more momentum and the buyers coming below 250 million. I wouldn't blame you if you grabbed a couple of Ishtars at this point. It's still risky, it's the cruisers, it's a bit more tricky, but this is a super sharp drop off, and buying below 250 million I don't think is a bad position. The Manticore next, still holding well above 30 million, so I wouldn't say that we have a definite buy opportunity here just yet. 33.5 for the sellers and 30.5 for the buyers. Nope, that's a no for me. Nemesis double spike, so two great sell opportunities, but where are these buy opportunities at 25 million? We're just not dropping off fast and deep enough. So still 30 million for the buyers and 33, so no, I don't like it. It's too late to sell, it's too early to buy, unfortunately. The Pontifex is staying very strong as well, 85 million for the sellers. So unless there's a, for these destroyers and these cruisers, unless there is a very sharp drop off like here for the Ishtar, to me it just feels like no, the volumes are too small. You're not gonna make ISK on those trades as long as the chart looks like this. The Purifier next, yet another sell opportunity that went up from a price well above 30 million. So very tricky to actually find those buy opportunities at the moment. You are selling them for almost 40 million ISK though, so Purifier, if you happen to have a couple of those lying around, you can definitely sell them for a good ISK. Buyers at 33 million, still way too high for me personally. Get the Raptor, same story, holding at 35 million, so coming off from a high point, but coming nowhere near a buy opportunity. The Saber next, interdictor just basically 70 to 80 million, not enough volatility. I'd need to see a real drop off before I do anything in that market. Stiletto, you know, two nice opportunities at 40 million to sell at a great price, but look where we land, well above 30 million. Buyers coming in at 29.2. Could you risk it? Honestly, I don't like it. I personally don't like it. And now we've got the Stork. That looks more interesting again. Alright, first time in the bigger ships now. We've got the Stork and the Ishtar where we actually have a drop off, where we're breaking through that average 62.5 million. Look at it on the entire chart. Where are the buyers? 41 million. Bit of Stork demand going away. If you can grab a Stork, which is going to be very tricky at the current volumes of course, but if you can grab a Stork at the current buy prices, you are obviously making a pretty good investment here. So yeah, that is what we're looking for. Stork potentially, it's going to be very tricky to do. Ishtar, same thing, I think a bit easier. I think you are going to be able to pick up a couple of Ishtars below 150, but very good news for me. This is interesting. This is completely break with the pattern here. We had some hesitation here and there, but we never broke through the average price back towards prices from August, September, from before the moon mining changes. And here for the Stork, for the very first time, complete lack of demand. It's all in Jita and people are asking 41 million for the Stork. So very interesting to see that drop off all of a sudden. And then we get the Tyrannis holding above 30 million. So again, despite the buyers being at 28 million and the first seller at 30 million, I still don't like it. I think we have to go lower and we have to see a real drop off before we can call it a buy opportunity. So there you go, Tech 2 market, still tricky, but this and this, in my opinion, interesting points of data to definitely keep in mind. Next up we have the Tech 3 market at 43.20. There we go. As always, we'll start with some destroyers. Let's see what's happening here. Confessor basically stable at very low price points. Increased volume doesn't have a big impact on the market, so we are slightly oversupplied, but not too crazily. 39 million for the sellers, 34 million for the buyers. Plenty of supply, nothing in the hundreds that's going to crash the price down even more. So I would say for the Confessor, you could risk a buy order if you really want to make that investment right now, but I would personally have some patience because summertime is coming. Next up we have the Hecate, trying to hold on above 40 million, failing at the end here. 39 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers, and it's still nothing too crazy on the supply side. And That does mean that, well, maybe these are the opportunities, these are the low price points, but I think that there is more production potential out there, and that basically the wormhole guys are keeping that market, especially the destroyer market, the tactical destroyer market, in a decent range. They're being careful not to oversupply it, but if they lose their patience on low sales, on low activity in the summer, perhaps a better opportunity could still show up. Here is the Jackdaw next, up just a touch from last week, 39 million for the sellers, 36 for the buyers. And yeah, again, 53.95, you know, that to me, and that in the last 24 hours, look at that, in the last 24 hours, still in the last 24 hours, that's going from 41 million down to 39 million, but the volumes, they are there. That's quite a few Jackdaws to come in 24 hours, and I think that they've been careful not to go too crazy on the amounts that a single sell order does, but that potential for overproduction, I think, is shown here in the Jackdaw. Next up, we have the Zwepel that is slowly edging up towards more than 35 million, 36 for the sellers, 33.5 for the buyers. So you can clearly see that this is really low on the buyer side of things. You still have 120 and 433 here. So it's not too crazy, but that specter for the tactical destroyers, in my opinion, still looms. You still have to be a little bit careful that there might be even more supply waiting that would crash the price down even lower. For the cruisers, I personally just don't like this market because I think it's being manipulated. Here was the Legion dropping off slowly, steadily. That felt like a natural continuation of the market here, dropping off just a little bit more sharply down to 160, and then I think there's just been a lot of buying all of a sudden, and now we're back at 200 million, and these amounts of ships, you can easily manipulate that. So I think that's basically what's happening here. Loki staying above 200 million, so 223. It's going to be a bit trickier to manipulate this amount of Lokis, but it can still pretty easily be done, in my opinion. The Proteus, again, I think that this was complete manipulation to bring the price from 140 up to 200 million ISK, and it's now dropping off to 176. So I think that this drop off here and this hesitation is normal market activity, but just look at these abyssal volumes. You're not gonna make trades in this, and it's still 315. This is not a crazy amount of Protei below 200 million, I would say, to still like snatch up as a big investment, and then hope that you can actually sell them for those higher prices. Tengu, same thing, that's increased up to 250. Don't really see that in the volumes or anything like that, so I'm putting this on manipulation. There is more supply coming in then. I'm going to assume that all these ones are not coming from those investors, so that is starting to put some pressure on the price, starting to undercut a little bit. But it's not enough to really dissuade anyone from trying to continue the manipulation of the market. We need to see volumes in the dozens, if not hundreds of these ships before that stops, and before I would say we might actually take a look at the tech tree market now and see if there's a good investment opportunity. It's just not happening for the cruisers, at least. For the destroyers, I think that that can still happen, and we are, of course, for the destroyers talking a lot more ships to snatch up, and a lot easier production, faster production that can counter those types of attempts. So the tech tree market, very interesting. I do wonder what's going to happen with the destroyers, especially in the summer, and if there is indeed far more production, maybe even to the cruiser market as well. Let's move on to the extra product at let's say 4830. Because I'll have to do a little bit of searching, because I want to take a look at some faction modules for cruisers. So this is obviously Abyss related, this idea, and one of the main ones will be the hull and armor repair. So we've got medium armor rep, and then we'll go to faction and look at that. This is the abyssal impact on these items as expected, and so I'd been hoarding a lot of these loot drops from my exploration before the Abyss came out, and especially here, for instance, for the medium armor reps, we're going from 320 million for an A-type, currently selling for almost 500 million. There is a lot of gambling on that happening, and it's It's expensive, but this is the type of item, if you get a good roll on that, then you've really grabbed something that was already very, very good and you've made it really super strong. And on something like exploration PvE cruisers, it's often worth it to make that investment. You're not gonna pimp out to an officer mod, because that just costs ridiculous amounts of ISK, but taking that gamble towards something that is officer grade, that is something that a lot of people are willing to do, as I personally expected. So that is a very nice increase in price. The B-type, same thing, 20 to 40 million, a doubling of the price. Here's the C-type going from 100 million to almost 250 million, and then we can go over all of these, but they are obviously, whoops, that's a show info button. They are obviously all increased in price quite greatly. And so those really useful, strong, base, important mods that can now be gambled upon through the Abyss have shown some very nice increases in price. Especially here in the armor reps, for instance, we can expect the same thing in the propulsion mod. So here are the afterburners. Let's go for faction, and then obviously if you go for the 100 MN, it's a bit of a jump. You do still notice it, but not in all of them. But then if you go for 10 MN, for instance, here is the Corellum A-type starting at 500 million, selling for 1 billion and even almost 1.5 billion. Here's the B-type, same pattern, and then 50 million, 300 million, and then the C-type starts at, what is this, 61 million, high point 140 million. This is practically a doubling of the price in some of these really good modules. Same here with the Gistums, A-type, 10 MN, lovely increase in price, B-type and C-type. So I was right, but not on everything, of course. If I would, for instance, go towards something else, I think that I checked out the Nosferatus, so we can do medium. Here the Nosferatus, it's also something that you can try to upgrade through into the Abyss, but it's not as core an item as an afterburner or an armor repair, and so as a result these are going from 20 million, did go up to 35 million, but nothing too crazy. Same with the B-type, did go to a 1-year high point of around 40 million just about 10 days ago, but it's already dropping off back in regular territory. And the C-type, you do see some volatility around it, but it's not a doubling in price that we're seeing in some of the core items. That is obviously something that we should have remembered as well. People are not going to make these types of gambles, or not going to spend crazy extra ISK on something like a Nosferatu when that is very less likely to be that core, that critical, and that big of an upgrade to your ship. Perhaps what we could also take a look is the shield boosters. Do you think that that happens as well? I'm not sure, I haven't checked that as part of my preparation, but we can definitely take a look at that. Yeah, to my surprise here, Gistum A-type shield booster, there's obviously an impact from Into the Abyss, but it's not a crazy one, it's from 30 to 40 million. Here is the B-type, nothing too crazy either. The C-type, the A-type though, Pitum A-type, that did go up from 250 to 400 million ISK. Here's the B-type, the Pitums, those have gone up. The Gistums haven't, so quite interesting. This one, Pitum B-type, 110 million. And here at the high point, 260 million ISK. And then the C-type, also a bit more muted. It started at 30, it's at 40, and it's already dropping off. So it's not a unified picture, but there's definitely this trend that the core items that can be changed with the mutaplasmids have gone up in price a lot when it comes to these faction pieces. Very, very good news for explorers like myself. I have in fact found myself exploring a lot in the last few weeks, and I have been making some pretty good ISK that way, because I'm basically the one that is supplying the raw materials for other people to take the gamble on. And that's it for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.